They laughed at my pain, but I had a final, shocking revenge. They thought they won, but I had one last card to play. Mike Morrison, 38, a seasoned construction worker, lived a life that most would envy. Stable job, a decent home, and a family he loved. However, beneath the surface of suburban tranquility, everything was about to crumble. Mike lived in Raquel Falls, a quiet town in Texas. His world was built on hard work, and he took pride in the work he did with Curtis Construction. His wife, Rhonda, had always been the woman he thought he could rely on. They had 2 children, Michelle and Mickey, and for years, Mike did everything in his power to give them a life of comfort. But one summer afternoon, everything changed. Mike was coming home from work, driving down Wesley Drive, when he noticed something that immediately caught his eye. A sleek, silver Mercedes-Benz was parked in front of his house. He didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was a visitor. But then he saw the license plate PY1. It belonged to John Perry, a local contractor who had worked with Mike for years. They weren't exactly friends, but they had mutual respect for one another, despite their competing businesses. When Mike stepped into his house, expecting to greet his family, he froze. There they were, his wife, Rhonda, sitting on the couch, her body curled up next to John Perry. She looked up at Mike, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen in years: smugness. "Mike, I don't know how to say this," Rhonda stammered, avoiding his gaze. "But John and we're together now." Mike's world spun. He wanted to shout, to scream, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stood there, rooted to the spot. His children, Michelle and Mickey, sat on the couch across from him, their faces a mixture of confusion and excitement. John, a man Mike had once considered a colleague, was now the one holding Rhonda's hand. The man who had been a part of his life for years, sharing work and occasional laughs, was now sharing his wife's affections. Mike didn't know if he wanted to hit John or walk away. What he did know was that his family was falling apart before his eyes. John stood up to leave, but Mike wasn't done. His anger exploded in an instant. He shoved John back into his seat, his hands trembling with fury. Rhonda screamed for Mike to stop, but it was too late. Mike's hand struck John's cheek, sending him reeling backward. Rhonda's face turned red with anger, but it was nothing compared to the rage boiling inside Mike. "You're pathetic," Rhonda snapped, her voice cold as ice. "You never could live up to what I needed." And with that, everything shattered. His marriage, his family, his life as he knew it. The next few days passed in a blur. Rhonda filed for divorce, demanding primary custody of their children, as well as child support and a portion of Mike's retirement fund. She had already manipulated John into helping her financially, and Mike knew it was only a matter of time before she took everything else. Mike sat at the kitchen table, reading through the divorce petition. It felt like a cruel joke. His wife, the woman he had devoted his life to, was taking everything from him. The house, the children, the money, nothing was safe. And in the back of his mind, he wondered how he had missed the signs. How had it come to this? The pain in Mike's chest was suffocating. He had always prided himself on his work ethic, on the belief that no matter what, he could make things right. But nothing could fix the wreckage that had become of his marriage. It was a slow burn, watching Rhonda and John flaunt their new relationship. Their betrayal cut deep, but it wasn't just the infidelity. It was the utter disregard for everything Mike had done for his family. The divorce papers were just the beginning. Rhonda wanted it all: custody of their children, child support, and half of everything Mike had worked for. The house, the car, even the retirement savings he had carefully built up over the years. Everything was on the table. Mike wasn't going to let her have it without a fight, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. Rhonda had already moved on. Emotionally, financially, and even socially, she was wrapped around John's finger. And John was making sure that Mike's life continued to unravel. It was a Tuesday when Mike found out the extent of Rhonda's manipulation. John had been in town, and Mike's old friend, Lyle Curtis, had caught wind of the affair and its aftermath. The two men sat at a local diner over a cup of coffee, trying to make sense of the mess that had become Mike's life. "Man, I knew something was off," Lyle said, shaking his head. "John's been acting weird lately. There were rumors, but I didn't want to believe it." Mike's eyes narrowed. "Rumors? What are you talking about?" Lyle's face flushed, and he lowered his voice. "Look, I've known John for years. Hell, we've shared jobs, and I've always thought he was a decent guy. But something's been off. He's been spending way too much time with Rhonda, even more than a business partner should. I saw the way he looked at her. Hell, I saw how she looked at him." Mike's heart raced. "You're telling me you knew and didn't say anything?" Lyle sighed. "I didn't want to get involved, Mike. But now, with everything happening, I've got a sinking feeling in my gut that it's not just the affair. John's been in this to take you down. He's been using Rhonda to get to you." Mike clenched his fists under the table. "Take me down? How?" Lyle leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's more to it, Mike. Rhonda's not just after your house and your savings. She's after your business, your career. John's been slowly edging in, positioning himself to take over." The realization hit Mike like a slap to the face. He had always trusted John, always considered him a competitor but one with honor. But now it was clear. John had been playing the long game, and Mike had been a fool to not see it. In the days that followed, Mike's anger reached new heights. He couldn't focus on anything. His work, once his sanctuary, felt like a prison. Every job was just a reminder of how his life had been upended by the woman he had loved and the man he had called a colleague. One afternoon, as Mike was finishing a job at a local construction site, he overheard a conversation that made his blood boil. "It's all falling apart for Mike, huh?" one of the workers said, laughing. "His wife left him for John. Bet she's taking him for everything he's got." Mike gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay calm. He was used to gossip in the construction business, but this stung. People didn't just gossip about his personal life, they were relishing his downfall. That night, after a grueling day, Mike came home to an empty house. Rhonda and the kids were gone, and the place felt like a ghost town. The quiet was oppressive, suffocating. Mike opened a beer, but it didn't help. Nothing would. Not anymore. His thoughts turned to the kids, Michelle and Mickey. They were still his children, no matter what Rhonda said or did. He wanted them back, wanted to be the father they had known, the one who took them fishing and watched their games. But he knew it wasn't going to be easy. Rhonda had already turned them against him. His own children, the ones he had loved and raised, were siding with John and Rhonda. The phone call from Michelle came a few days later, and it nearly broke him. Her voice was cold, detached. "Dad, we're going to the lake with John this weekend," she said, barely a hint of emotion. "We're going water skiing, and maybe even take the boat out." Mike didn't know how to respond. "What about me, Michelle? What happened to our plans?" Michelle sighed, a sound full of frustration. "You're always too busy, Dad. John's been there for us. He's been better than you ever were. He's fun." The words hit Mike like a freight train. His own daughter, the little girl he had raised, was choosing John over him. It felt like a betrayal, a wound that would never heal. Mike had always prided himself on being a provider, on being a man who could weather any storm. But this storm, this betrayal, felt like it was tearing him apart. He had tried to maintain his dignity, to keep his head high, but every step he took seemed to lead him further into the abyss. Every time he saw Rhonda and John together, his heart twisted. Every time he heard his children speak of their new life, it was like a dagger to his chest. The hardest part wasn't losing his home, or his savings, or even the respect of his colleagues. It was losing his children, Michelle and Mickey. Their faces haunted him in his quiet moments. They weren't the children he had raised. They were strangers now, swayed by Rhonda's manipulation and John's shiny promises. It didn't help that John seemed to be everywhere, a constant presence, a reminder that he had taken Mike's place. Not just in Rhonda's life, but in the very core of Mike's existence. Every job, every decision, John was there making sure that Mike's life continued to unravel. One evening, as Mike sat at a bar nursing a drink, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Lyle Curtis. "Mike, you need to know something." Mike's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what Lyle had uncovered, but after everything that had happened, he had to know. The text continued, "John's not just after your marriage. He's got a plan, and it's working." Mike's hands shook as he typed a quick response. "What plan? What the hell is he doing?" Lyle replied almost instantly. "He's setting you up for a fall. The construction business, Mike. He's got his eyes on your clients, your contracts, your connections, and he's slowly moving in. That's why he's been so close to Rhonda. He's got leverage, and he's using it against you." Mike felt his stomach turn. John was using Rhonda, using her to destroy him, not just emotionally, but financially and professionally. Mike had always thought of himself as a man who could build anything. But now he realized John was systematically dismantling everything he had worked for. And the worst part? Mike couldn't even confront him directly. John was untouchable, and Mike was left with nothing but the wreckage of his life. As the days passed, the tension between Mike and Rhonda escalated. Their divorce proceedings dragged on, with Rhonda fighting for every penny she could get. But it wasn't just the money that infuriated Mike. It was the way she treated him, the way she humiliated him at every turn. She didn't even have the decency to be discreet about her relationship with John. She flaunted it in front of their children, in front of everyone, as if to say, "I won, you lost." One afternoon, Mike received a call from his lawyer. It was bad news, but it wasn't unexpected. Rhonda had filed for a restraining order, accusing Mike of harassment. The idea that she had the nerve to do this, after everything she had put him through, made Mike's blood boil. The restraining order wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a weapon in Rhonda's arsenal, a way to make sure Mike stayed out of his children's lives and to prevent him from getting too close to any part of his past. "Don't you think this is a bit much?" Mike asked his lawyer, barely holding it together. "I know it's hard, Mike, but you need to stay calm. Just let the process play out." But Mike wasn't calm. He couldn't be. His life was slipping through his fingers, and no one seemed to care. The tension at home grew unbearable. Every time Mike tried to see his kids, Rhonda would make excuses, or worse, send John to intercept him. Mike would see them, Michelle and Mickey, off in the distance, playing in the yard or swimming in the pool that John had bought them. They didn't look back. They didn't care. They had already chosen their side. And then, one evening, Mike received a call from Mickey, of all people. The boy sounded different. Mike hadn't heard his son's voice like this in years. It was quiet, unsure. "Dad," Mickey said, his voice shaky, "can you come get me? I don't know what to do anymore." Mike's heart raced. It wasn't the response he expected. Mickey had always been the distant one, the one who seemed to follow Rhonda's lead. But now, there was something in his voice, something that told Mike this wasn't just a teenage tantrum. This was real. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Mike replied, his voice steady, though his pulse was pounding. When Mike arrived at John's house, he found Mickey sitting alone on the porch, his face streaked with tears. "Son, what's going on?" Mike asked, kneeling down in front of him. "I don't know, Dad," Mickey mumbled. I can't do this anymore. John, he's not who he seems. Mom, she's not the same anymore. I don't know where I belong. I thought I was making the right choice, but I was wrong." Mike sat down next to his son, his heart breaking. "Mickey, you're not alone. I've always been here no matter what. You've got a place with me." But as they talked, Mike's anger grew. Rhonda had not only torn their family apart emotionally, but she had pushed their son to the breaking point. John had manipulated him, and now Mickey was caught in the crossfire of a war he never wanted. "Dad," Mickey said, voice cracking, "can you help me? Can we fix this? I don't want to lose you too." Mike's hand shook as he reached out to pull his son close. "We'll fix this, son. I promise." But as he held Mickey, Mike knew it wouldn't be easy. This was just the beginning. The real fight was only starting, and he had no idea how far Rhonda and John would go to destroy him. Mike couldn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, his mind racing. The anger inside him burned like a fire that couldn't be put out. Mickey's confession had torn through him like a jagged knife. He had always thought he could fix things, that he could rebuild the shattered pieces of his life. But now it seemed like the odds were stacked against him. Rhonda, John, and the entire world were closing in. As Mike lay there, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Lyle. "Mike, John's getting bold. I heard him talking about taking over your biggest contract. He's pushing hard for that deal. Be ready." The words hit Mike like a punch to the gut. John wasn't just after his family. He was after everything Mike had built. The thought of John, who had once been a colleague, a man Mike had respected, scheming behind his back made his blood boil. John wasn't just a competitor. He was a traitor. The next day, Mike made a decision. It wasn't enough to fight for custody of his children or salvage what was left of his business. It was time to fight back, to take control of his own destiny again. If John and Rhonda wanted to tear his life apart, he wasn't going to stand idly by. He would make sure they paid for what they had done. He called his lawyer, Barbara Trenton, a woman who had been working tirelessly on his divorce case. He needed her more than ever now. There was a fire in his voice that wasn't there before. "Barbara, I need everything we can get. Every piece of information on John. Every contract. Every move he's made with my clients. If he's trying to take over my business, I need to know how. I'm not letting him win." Barbara's response was swift. "Mike, we've got this. We'll dig into his business practices. If John's playing dirty, we'll expose him." Mike hung up the phone, his mind already racing through the next steps. It wasn't just about winning this battle. It was about taking back what was his life, his family, his business. The following days were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and phone calls. Mike had never felt more determined. He would track John's every move, find every crack in his facade, and expose the man for what he truly was. John was no longer the man who had helped Mike with concrete deliveries and shared a laugh at the 4th of July picnic. John was an enemy now, and Mike was going to make sure he lost. But the deeper Mike dug, the more he uncovered. John wasn't just after Mike's business. He had been feeding Rhonda's ego, promising her the world, playing the part of the savior. He was giving her everything Mike hadn't: luxury, attention, the life she'd always wanted. And Mike realized with sickening clarity that John had manipulated Rhonda just as he had manipulated everyone else. He wasn't just taking what was Mike's. He was taking Rhonda's loyalty as well. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was the way John had exploited Rhonda's weaknesses, using her own desires against her. Mike had always known she had a tendency to want more attention, more things. But he had never imagined she could be so easily swayed. For years, Mike had worked long hours, providing everything she asked for, only for John to swoop in and take her in an instant. That afternoon, Mike found himself in a confrontation he had been dreading. Rhonda called him, her voice dripping with venom. "Mike, you need to stop fighting this. It's over. You lost," she said, her tone mocking. "I'm with John now. The kids are happier, and they have a future. You're pathetic. A loser. You couldn't even keep your family together. You should have seen it coming." The words stung more than he expected. It wasn't just the insults. It was the certainty in her voice, the finality with which she spoke. She had made her choice, and Mike was no longer a part of her world. "I'm done with this, Rhonda," Mike said through gritted teeth. "You want John? Fine. But don't you dare use the kids against me. I'm their father, and I'm not going to let you or him take that away from me." Rhonda laughed bitterly. "You're delusional if you think you can fix this. I don't care what you think. The only thing you've ever cared about is yourself. Well, now it's John and me, and we're going to live our lives the way we want." The conversation ended with a harsh click. Mike's hands were trembling as he put down the phone. The pain was unbearable, but it wasn't the time to give in. It was time to take action. The next day, Mike received a phone call that set the stage for the final confrontation. It was from one of his old contacts in the construction world, a man named Tony who worked for a competitor. Tony had some inside information. John had been trying to steal one of Mike's major contracts. He had been making offers to Mike's clients, promising them a better deal, using his relationship with Rhonda to get closer to the decision makers. "Mike," Tony said, his voice low, "I don't want to get involved, but I know what John's up to. He's been using Rhonda to leverage deals. He's going after your clients, Mike, and he's not going to stop until he's taken everything." Mike's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about family anymore. John had crossed the line. This was war. "I'll make sure he doesn't get away with it," Mike said, his voice hard as steel. "Get me everything you have. All the details. I'm taking him down." Mike stood at the edge of his backyard, staring at the house that once represented everything he had worked for. The tall fence, the lush garden, the swing set. These things no longer felt like home. The house was a reminder of all he had lost. His children were gone, Rhonda was with John, and the business he had built from the ground up was slipping from his grasp. But then, something unexpected happened. A knock on the door. Mike wasn't sure what to expect when he opened it, but it certainly wasn't Rhonda standing there, looking sheepish, her eyes red. For a moment, he thought he might still be dreaming. "What are you doing here?" Mike asked, his voice cold, but there was a flicker of hope in his chest. Maybe it was some kind of mistake. Maybe she had come to ask for forgiveness. Rhonda took a deep breath, then said the words Mike never thought he'd hear. "I'm sorry, Mike, for everything, for how I treated you, for how I let John use me. I wasn't myself." Mike's mind reeled. This was not the woman he had known for years, the one who had made it clear that John was her future. But something in her voice, the raw honesty, caught him off guard. He could see the pain in her eyes, and despite everything, a part of him felt the smallest glimmer of compassion. "I've made a mess of everything," Rhonda continued, her voice trembling. "John used me, Mike. He wasn't just after you. He was after everything we had. He promised me the world, but all he gave me was lies and manipulation. I didn't see it at first, but I do now. I'm sorry." Mike's heart pounded as he tried to process it all. Was this real? Was she really apologizing for what she had done? Could he trust her again after everything that had happened? It was so much to absorb. Too much. "I don't know what to say," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You destroyed everything, Rhonda. My family, my business, my trust. You let John turn you against me. And now you're here, asking for forgiveness." Rhonda's eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mike. I don't deserve it. But I had to tell you the truth. John's been scheming behind my back for months. He wanted everything. Our life, your business, your clients. He used me to get closer to you, to destroy everything you've worked for. I was just a pawn in his game. But now I see it. I've lost my family, Mike, and it's all my fault." Mike's anger flared again. But this time, it wasn't directed at her. It was directed at John, the man who had manipulated them both, who had used Rhonda's desires and weaknesses to tear their family apart. Mike took a deep breath. The betrayal still stung, but there was something different now. The truth was out. John's web of lies was finally unraveled. "I need to make this right," Mike said, his voice firm. "Not for you, Rhonda. Not for John. But for my kids. They don't deserve to be caught in the middle of all this. And I won't let you or John take everything from me." Rhonda nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I'll fight for them, Mike. I'll fight for our kids. I need your help." For a moment, Mike thought about it. It had been so long since he'd felt like he was in control of his life. But now, with Rhonda's confession, there was a chance, just a chance, that he could win back what had been stolen from him. "I'll help you," Mike said finally, "but we do it on my terms. No more lies, no more games. You stay away from John, Rhonda. I don't care what happens between you two, but I'm done being your pawn." Rhonda nodded, her eyes sincere. "I'll stay away. I promise." And just like that, Mike took the first step toward reclaiming his life. It wouldn't be easy, and the scars would take time to heal. But the betrayal had finally been exposed. And with that, Mike's resolve was stronger than ever. As Mike stood there, watching Rhonda leave, he realized something. He didn't need John, he didn't need Rhonda's approval, and he didn't need anyone's validation. All he needed was himself. And for the first time in months, he felt like he had the power to rebuild.